My name is Steve McInerney. I'm the Executive Director of POMED, the Project on Middle East Democracy. We're going to move from sort of a broader discussion of the Gulf. I think we had an excellent panel that just concluded on sort of concerns broadly in the Gulf and the trends in the Gulf and what it means for U.S. relations with the Gulf, with the GCC countries. For those of you that were here this morning at 8:30 when we kicked off, Congressman Jim McGovern had some excellent and very powerful remarks regarding the importance specifically of developments in Bahrain. And Bahrain is a country and issue that we at POMED have followed very closely for some time, including before the beginning of the uprising in February 2011. And we're happy to convene this panel to kind of look more closely, in more detail at the state of play in Bahrain. You see, we've entitled this panel, "The Crisis in Bahrain, Is a Negotiated Solution Possible?" Obviously, as was mentioned earlier today, today is just one day before the 2-year anniversary of the beginning of the uprising in Bahrain. As this anniversary comes, it's a moment in which there's renewed effort after quite some time at negotiations, at national dialogue. And one of the primary focus of this panel will be not only, we'll look at the state of that national dialogue. We have an excellent panel here to look at what the prospects are for success of the current effort in national dialogue. But we'll also look more broadly, a little longer term, in terms of what the elements of any negotiated solution to the sort of ongoing political crisis in Bahrain must be, what opportunities there would be for a resolution, whether it's through the sort of current negotiations and dialogue that are underway right now, or whether it would be to take place in the future. And we'll look as well at what opportunities there are for the United States and other international actors to play a supporting role in help bring that about. To get us started here, we're excited to welcome, our panel will feature 2 guests that are in town this week from Bahrain. Our first speaker will be Khalil Al-Marzooq. Khalil is the Assistant Secretary General for International Political Affairs for Al-Wefaq Political Society, the primary political opposition party in Bahrain. And he will be able to give us his own kind of firsthand insight in the state of, in his expectations for the national dialogue efforts that are currently underway. Our second speaker will be Jalila Al-Salman. She's also visiting from Bahrain this week to participate. She's a Bahraini teacher and educator. She's also the vice president of the Bahrain Teachers Association. She's been, among many that have been targeted by the Bahraini government. She was arrested in March and April of 2011 in conjunction with her efforts of the Bahraini Teachers Association and support for the protests and calling for strikes during that time. She'll be able to give us her perspective and of the impact of developments in Bahrain on the education sector, as well as sort of on the labor sector and workers, including teachers in Bahrain. And then our third speaker will be Tom Malinowski. Tom's the Washington Director for Human Rights Watch. He also served previously at the White House during the Clinton administration. And he has been following these issues very closely. Traveled to Bahrain last year. He also was arrested during his brief visit in Bahrain last year. And he will be able to focus not only on kind of what's happening and what the prospects are for a negotiated solution in Bahrain, but particularly on what opportunities there are for the United States government and other international actors to play a more constructive, supportive role in that process. So we'll begin with Khalil.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I would like just to start with thanking POMED, NED, NDI, IRA, and the Honorable Congressman McGovern, and all those supporters for the rights of Bahrainis for long-standing position towards trying to achieve something to the Bahrainis from their universal rights. Maybe it's not coincidence that the Bahraini chose to have 14 February, which is the Valentine Day, to have the uprising. It's just a symbol of those aspirations towards love and like, rather than hatred and aggressiveness to the people. Tomorrow is the Valentine, as well as the second anniversary of the Bahraini people to move into their struggle to democracy and freedom, dignity, and to have a system that is integrating everyone, protecting everyone, and providing the aspiration for development to everyone. What's happening in Bahrain in this month is an escalation of events from the protesters, from the people. They wanting to show that they are very determined to continue this journey and never retreat and go home without achieving their aspirations, their future, their protection to themselves and for future generation. At the same time, recently we had a call for an opening that could be credible and that might not. And this call for a dialogue, if we work all together to make this opening an opportunity and turn this opportunity to credibility, and I think is negotiated solution possible, yes. But if we kept opening something that is trying to give credits to the authorities and the government of Bahrain, like the unprecedented move by commissioning 5 high-standing commissioners, Mr. Bassiouni, Nigel Kirsch, and others, to come to Bahrain and to describe a little bit the iceberg of what's happening in Bahrain from the authorities towards its people. And after accrediting this report and accepting it and promising to deliver more than a year and almost a half, nothing. I think the previous panel was saying that the situation in Bahrain is worse than even before. So these type of trying to whitewash the situation, trying to provide a decorative moves into the Bahraini situation every now and then, this won't work. So if you ask me, how do you perceive this call? And is it going to be credible? And is it going to be a step forward to solve the Bahrain situation? I said, let's keep emotion aside. Let's be politicians that try to work to seize opportunity and create from these opportunities credibility and move on to create solutions. And the question is, what if this opportunity is not seized and not turned to a solution, or at least a process to a solution? There will be lots of trouble. I think the deterioration of the situation in Bahrain is going to continue. There are lots of scenarios. I don't want to be that much pessimistic in saying that, oh, this is the worst scenario that's going to happen. Nobody knows. Maybe we could continue another third year of pain and repression and whatever issues happening in Bahrain, but it could move into something that nobody wants. So shall we leave it not to be seized and let the situation deteriorate to something that we don't want? What if it succeeds? And I think if we want it to be successful, I think we need to work on that. It's just not wish. Like I said, it's not emotions. It's not something that pessimistic, optimistic, what to do. It's fun to have it or not to have it. No, we have to work on it. If we want it to succeed, we have to work. And how to make it successful? I think it's the first thing to do is to urge those who want credits for something fake to listen to wisdoms and say, no, this time we want credibility. We want first to have credible process. And negotiation and dialogue is not something that will be invented in Bahrain alone. This is even a science taught in universities and some colleges, etc. And there are millions of books, maybe thousands, hundreds, who knows. So there are measures, there are index. What do we mean by credible dialogue? So we are not inventing something in Bahrain. Those parties who are in dispute should be there. The process should be not like what happened in July last year, when 3 minutes out of 80 participants talking about hot topics like elected governments and other things, only one time you have 3 minutes to talk about it. So we have to abide by a credible process that open up a platform for real negotiation. We know that there are concerns from the ruling family, concerns from the elements in Bahrain, how to move into a political system that protects the right of everyone, and how to move into a system that is not enabling exploitation from external forces as well. There are lots of issues, no one denying these issues. So the best thing is to negotiate these issues and to put the governance into that political system that there will be no abuses from any part of the societies, especially those who empower. We don't want to change dictatorship with another dictatorship, whether it is Wefaq or whether it is some other groups reaching into the system. And I think we need to move into standards and values, principles that everyone is talking about, which is the universal rights of people to be in the system. I wouldn't talk about self-determination as a whole, but the voice of the people in the system, in the authorities. This is very important. This is not happening now. The people are undermined from being in the executive branch, the legislative branch, the judicial, the security. This is no more to be accepted. And I think to move, to benchmark our system to match with principles and values and successful stories. So it's the time for all of us, all stakeholders. We talked about just building from the previous panel when they talk about values and principles. So when we talk about why should we move to make a successful process in Bahrain, not just the Bahrainis, United States, international community. Values and principles, funny thing, fantastic thing. Somebody saying no. Interest, the strategic interest is much more important than values and principles. I'm sorry to, I don't know if Honorable and Ambassador Richard is here. When he said we don't know, or he don't expect even, the animal of constitution and monarchy is going to be in this region. And I'm unfortunate that maybe if we don't like this soft, swift animal of constitution and monarchy, then there will be a wild animal of Republicans in the future. Who knows? So if we don't accept things that will be of a certain compromise between the elite ruling family and the people, there might be other choices. And if we don't support the choices that bring everyone together, there might be times that we can't even prevent the choices that won't even satisfy lots of us. So I think contribution on values and principles and satisfying the national interest of international community and the regional stability that won't come without individual state stability. And individual state stability won't come without people, those people from those states. I'm talking about Bahrain and others. If they are not part of the system, there won't be stability in any country. There won't be stability in Bahrain. So the only way to maintain national interest, not just the Bahraini national interest, because of the interest of the US and the other international community, I think we need to be very focused on seizing this opportunity, making it credible, and getting out a credible solution that satisfied most of the Bahrainis. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Khalil. Jalila is going to present from the use a PowerPoint presentation.
Hi and good morning, everybody. I would like to begin by thanking ADHRB for inviting me here to the United States and for making my trip a successful visit. Special thanks to Mr. Hussein Abdullah, who is the director, and for all who works with him. Thank you very much. After 2 years of non-stop struggling in Bahrain towards justice and democracy, freedom and equality, and despite all atrocities committed against the Bahraini people, Bahraini are still there on the road. They are still fighting for their rights. And of course, if I'm talking about everybody in Bahrain, education is not an exception. I will be focusing on 3 points. It's labor updates, teach education updates, and finally, I will give a life testimony. Labor updates. According to the General Federation of Bahrain Trade Union, the dismissal started on March 2011. And on June 2011, there was a case which was raised in the ILO. And of course, everybody knows about the Pickey report, which was released on November 2011. And all of these were talking about the dismissed labors and how these are to be reinstated. After that, there was an agreement, a three-party agreement between the government and the trade union and the companies with the dismissed labors. This agreement have a lot of points, and if we just go through it, most of the points have not been implemented or just partially implemented. And still we are having a lot of dismissed workers. We have around 900 workers still not in work. This graph will show to you the dismissal and the violation in Bahrain. As times go on, from November 2011 till now, till January 2013, we will see that the dismissals are decreasing, while as the violations against the labor in every part is increasing. In each sectors, we have the percentage share of dismissals. We have 10% in the public sectors, 14% in the big companies, and 57% in the private, which I call here is the private-to-private, which these are the small and medium companies. And we have 19% of others, same as the militaries. While I go to education and teachers in Bahrain, we will find that 80% of them were subjected to different kind of violations. That's a very huge number if you said 80% of the educators in Bahrain. More than 63% were questions either in the police stations or in illegally formed discipline board. 50% of them were subjected to 10-day suspension plus salary cut. 30% were forced transfer to another workplace. 1% was demoted from their works, and 5% were sent to court, and finally 3% were dismissed. Most of them were reinstated, but we're still having some. I read something here that this percentage are not very accurate because a lot of numbers is changing according to the violations of Ministry of Education. They are going on, and these numbers is changing. What are the ongoing violations against teachers in Bahrain? Teachers who have been subjected to any type of punishment have been designed from promotions, incentives, suspension, salary cut, forced transfer, annual raise, demoting and responsibilities, as you see here in the percentage. We have still 9 dismissed teachers, and we have still a lot of teachers. There are 6 teachers in prison. Most of them is Mahdi Abu Deeb, who is the head of Field Teacher Union in Bahrain, and the other picture, this one is Mahdi Abu Deeb, and this one is Ahmed Radi. He is there also, one of the known teachers in prison, and still we have 9 dismissed. About the students, 400 were suspended from University of Bahrain. 7 of them were sent off to military court. Students in civilian courts, there were 144 students were sent to civilian court. 80 of them were arrested. And what we have now, we have 7 University of Bahrain students are still there serving long sentences. And we have now also the new expelled students from University of Bahrain. We have 9. And if we talk about the school students, which means that's under 18, we are having at least 120 students there. This is a picture of the University of Bahrain students who are being targeted. What happens then? And 2011, of course, the university was as normal atmosphere, and the events began on 13th of March. That's the day when the thugs raided the university. After that, the students were detained, prosecuted, and expelled. In 2012, after the SUNY report, students were back to University of Bahrain and PTC, but now they are re-expelled from the university. These are the 9 students. We are having them in jail from the University of Bahrain. Most recently is Muhammad Abdul Karim, who was arrested from the airport when he was coming back to Bahrain from a trip. This is a sample of the dismissal reports. All the dismissed students from the University of Bahrain were to be a very excellent students. They own their scholarship. And now, because they are expelling them, they are asking them to pay back the scholarship. These students did not give up. They are protesting for their rights. They are trying to get back to the university by any means. Now, I will just give a small testimony of mine, as I think that I am a living example of atrocity against workers, laborers, and women in Bahrain. I was arrested 3 times, tortured, sexually abused, ill-treated, forced to sign confession, and denied to any access to my lawyer. The first day that I saw my lawyer was on the first session of the military trial when he came in to the room and he said, "Who is Jalila?" He was introducing himself to me as my lawyer. I experienced injustice in both military and civilian courts, which is not the case just for me, it's for everybody in Bahrain. We were unable to defend ourselves, and the judge even was not able and was not willing to listen to our defendants also. About the dialogue. What education sector is going through gives a clear indication about the mentality that the government in Bahrain, that's governing Bahrain. Without a change in that mentality, it wouldn't be realistic to expect any real changes. This applies to the dialogue, of course. And one should not expect anything from it. What is needed is a real dialogue, a genuine one. That's what we need there in Bahrain, whereby not the government imposes their ideas on the other parties so they affect the dialogue. I really believe in the dialogue, and I believe that it's the only way to get out of the crisis in Bahrain. But in this situation, it's very difficult to be sure that it will do the job. It is just what I feel, it is just a propaganda for the Bahraini regime to the international world that they are doing this what's called a dialogue. This is what I think. It is surprising to see 2 ministers who are representative to the government are sitting to the dialogue table. One of them is the Minister of Justice, who accused the medics before their trials. And the other one is Minister of Education, who is responsible of the violation against 7,000 teachers in Bahrain and a lot of students there. This is not a good representative, and what we think we are gaining from that. Keeping political prisoners in jail till now is not a good sign that the government wants a successful dialogue. And especially that part, some leaders, we have the political leaders, the peaceful leaders inside prison who should be at the negotiation table, like Hassan Mishame, Abdul Wahab Hussein, Ibrahim Sharif, Abdul Jalil Singis, Abdul Hadi Al-Khawaja, Habib Al-Maqdad, and others. Thank you very much.
Thanks. And Tom, if you could kind of follow on those descriptions from Jalila and Khalil of where we are now, and also shift us in the direction of options for U.S. policy as well.
Sure. Thank you, Steve, and greetings to everybody here. Steve, you mentioned the little adventure that I had on a brief but really fascinating trip to Bahrain last year. As I've said to friends in the Bahraini government, your country will always have a special place in my heart, since it's the only country ever to have shown me the inside of a police station under those circumstances. So congratulations. That experience was, of course, a completely different experience of arrest than the one that Jalila described. It was, we were basically observing a demonstration and swept up in what happens at the end of many demonstrations in Bahrain, police charging and just picking up everybody willy-nilly, taking them to police stations where sometimes bad things happen. In this case, bad things did not happen, in part because we were there, and we actually ended up having a very fascinating time. We had a dialogue of our own with the police officers who were part of that operation, got them to talk about their perspective and what they experienced every night going into these Shia villages. They are victims of this crisis imposed by their leaders just as much as anybody else. And then just talking over tea with the folks at the police station. Myself, my colleagues, an activist who was arrested with us, and by the end, we all kind of ended up in the courtyard of the police station with a whole motley crew, including a U.S. Embassy person who was unnecessarily sent to save us, Nabil Rajab, who is, as many of you know, a distinguished human rights activist and opposition leader in his own right, who had also unnecessarily come to save us. And then members of the security forces, including one guy who my activist friend accused of being a torturer, and they were having a very cordial conversation about it. And sort of all of us were standing there in the courtyard, and I was thinking, this place is experiencing a crisis, and it may not turn out well, but they have not yet, they've not yet crossed the point of no return, as some societies, perhaps Syria being an important example of a country where it's very hard to see a dialogue between the conflicting parties resolving the crisis. I still think, at least I hope, that in Bahrain, based on my experiences there and those of others who I know and respect, that there is still a chance here for people in Bahrain who have a common love of their own country and very complex ties with each other, a very small place in which everyone knows each other. There is still a chance for people to come together and reach a compromise. But the question that you've asked is the right question. It's not whether a dialogue is possible, it's whether a negotiated solution is possible. And there's a danger here, because we in the United States and the international community, the rhetoric has emphasized the importance of dialogue, because that's a less threatening word than a negotiated settlement. But a dialogue is only a means to an end. A dialogue itself is not the solution to the problems that Bahrain faces. What I think everyone acknowledges is needed is a political compromise, one that addresses the grievances and the needs of both sides. And as in many conflict situations, it's actually fairly easy to see in advance what that negotiated solution would look like. In this case, it would be an empowered parliament, a parliament that is empowered to select important cabinet ministers and to actually manage the affairs of the country, and one that is elected in a fair and equal way by the people of the country and not gerrymandered so that one community has an overwhelming dominance in its ability to elect members to the parliament. A solution that guarantees minority rights and that guarantees some special role for the ruling family. So yes, a constitutional monarchy, a solution that begins the process of integrating the police and military. So it is not a country in which you have a complete sectarian, you have the security forces representing only one side in the sectarian divide. Just about everybody can describe that reasonable compromise. Both sides would have to compromise to get there, but everyone, I think, understands that that's where you need to go. The question is whether this dialogue that has been announced, that the king called for, was intended by the government as a mechanism for getting to that kind of solution, or whether it was intended as an effort to buy more time, to satisfy somehow those around the world who are saying dialogue, 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 but not actually intended to be a negotiating session with the aim of reaching a solution. So that's what we're going to have to see. And it's not yet clear to me which it is. There are some bad signs. The good sign is that the dialogue has begun, that the king called for it, that the opposition, I think to its great credit, decided to participate despite the uncertainty. The bad signs are that it's not yet clear what role the government is going to play in this process. You would think that it's obvious that the government would be a party to this, to any negotiation, because clearly the government is a party to the conflict in Bahrain, but some of the statements that the government has made since the dialogue was announced suggest that it sees itself more as a mediator, as a referee, in a process in which others talk about the country's political future. And that the way it will work is that the opposition parties will talk to the pro-government political societies, and then somehow they'll reach some recommendations which will be submitted to the government, and then the government will decide what to do. If that's the way it's going to work, it's not going to work, because in reality, the government is a party to the conflict, and it needs to be at the negotiating table with the opposition, with the aim of hammering out a political solution. Another bad sign is that the government has not taken any significant confidence-building measures of the sort that the United States, the opposition, many in the international community have called for. It has not released the country's leading political prisoners, the opposition leaders, who really need to be at the table for the dialogue and any solution coming out of the dialogue to be fully credible with the opposition supporters on the street. And it has not prepared, the government has not prepared its own constituency among the Sunni community in Bahrain for the necessity of compromise. On the contrary, over the last several months, you've seen we've seen a intense wave of propaganda in the pro-government, government-controlled media demonizing supporters of dialogue and compromise. And by the way, demonizing the United States as a country that supports compromise in Bahrain. And that's going to make it very difficult for the government to suddenly announce, if that is indeed its intention, that it has agreed to a compromise. So those are reasons for concern. What does all this mean for us, for the United States? I think the weakness, the major weakness in U.S. policy for the last couple of years has been that we've tried to kind of have it both ways in Bahrain. We have had a very difficult time setting priorities. On the one hand, the administration has repeatedly stressed its desire to see an end to human rights violations in the country and to see a political process that leads to compromise. On the other hand, it has labored intensely to try to reassure the ruling family that the United States' commitment to Bahrain is rock solid and unconditional. It has provided arms, it has withdrawn arms sales, it has started them again. It has kind of tried to keep it's tried to win over both sides. And I think the result of this policy has been to actually alienate both sides. The government is pissed off because arms sales were suspended for a time, and because the President and the Secretary of State have criticized them from time to time. The opposition is disappointed because the U.S. has in fact resumed arms sales, and because the criticism of the government has been intermittent and not particularly strong. And that has put us, I think, in some ways in the worst possible world. We have not been as effective as we could have been, as we should have been, in trying to promote a political settlement, and the absence of a settlement has greatly increased the danger of the kind of instability in Bahrain that will make it unsustainable in the long run if it continues to maintain the kind of security relationship that the United States has an interest in maintaining in Bahrain. I think the main lesson that I draw from this is that the only way to save that security partnership, which understandably is a priority for the Pentagon and for the Obama administration, the only way to save that security relationship may be to de-emphasize it for a time and to focus as a singular priority on the promotion of a political compromise in Bahrain that will stabilize the situation and make the long-term partnership with the United States sustainable. What does that mean? I think number one, if we're serious about promoting dialogue, we need to be engaging with both the government and the opposition on the same level. I don't think it sends a good signal when U.S. officials meet at the very highest levels with the head of the armed forces in Bahrain, with the crown prince, with the king, and keep the opposition to some extent at arm's length, especially when the opposition has done virtually everything that the administration has asked it to do in terms of condemning violence and trying to keep the demonstrations under control. Two, urge the government to take the kinds of confidence-building measures that I just mentioned, including the release of prisoners and tamping down this terrible rhetoric that is coming from government-controlled media organs that counteracts any steps that moderates in the ruling family may take towards dialogue. Three, set a very clear expectation that this current round of dialogue must lead to a political compromise. It is good news that the dialogue has started, but it is in a sense dangerous because if this round fails, those who promoted it and those who participated in it, moderates on both sides, may be discredited. So it's extremely important, having started on this path, that it continue and that it succeed on those terms. And to be clear, that if this round fails, the United States is going to have to reevaluate certain aspects of its relationship, including the security relationship. A lot of people who think and talk about Bahrain debate this question of whether the United States should maintain the naval base, the headquarters of the Fifth Fleet in Bahrain, if this crisis continues. I don't think that's the question is, should it be maintained? I think that it's more of a practical question. At a certain point, if there is no political compromise in Bahrain, you have one of two possible outcomes. In shorthand, revolution or repression. And we cannot sustain a security relationship with Bahrain if either of those two things happen. And so as a practical matter, I think it is very important that planners in the Pentagon be thinking about alternatives to the base. I think it would be irresponsible not to, from just a national interest point of view. And two, it's important to signal the fact that that planning is underway to the ruling family, more in sorrow than in anger, because I don't think any reasonable person would want the United States to have to leave Bahrain. But it is a reality that it might have to happen. And I think that the more that they understand that that is a possibility, the greater their incentive, because Bahrain needs the security relationship, in my view, more than the United States does, to take the steps that are necessary to preserve it. I think the stakes here are very high for the United States. It's a small country, but it is a very important country on the fault line between two worlds in the Middle East, a place where the United States can demonstrate that our support for democracy and reform and human rights in the Middle East is principled and not situational. It's what I think President Obama wants to convey. I think it's what he tried to convey in his State of the Union address last night, in his brief mention of reform struggles in the region. But Bahrain is the place where we can prove it, and I hope we do. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks. Khalil, I wanted you to get you to respond and follow up on some of the, Tom was describing some of the problems with the current efforts at dialogue, or some of the reasons to doubt that it will lead to a negotiated solution, or even to doubt that that's really its intent, and that there's sort of some troubling signals from the government in terms of its role in the dialogue and its rhetoric, not being conducive to compromise. Could you give from your perspective, from Al-Wefaq's perspective, What would be the most important things that you all would want to see sort of in the short term? What's the most important signals from the government that would demonstrate the kind of seriousness that you have said is so important, and that Tom was just describing the reasons to doubt?
I think it is in this theme is that it should be hard for us to reject it rather than hard for us to accept it. The theme now is that what is being offered is only into allowing Wefaq or the opposition, let me say it this way, is that to think 100 times before joining any step, which is very hard for us to accept rather than very hard for us to reject. And I think about a political process that if there is not just the will, but there is the seriousness of moving into a political process, as Tom mentioned, the real conflict, the real issue, the core problem in Bahrain is between the rulers and the people, not just the Shia. I would like to talk about citizens rather than Shia and Sunnis. The citizens in Bahrain, they have no say in their political system. Only what we have is this decorative legislative authority with gerrymandering and with the 40 appointees. This is nullifying the power of this legislative authority. So where is the people of Bahrain in the political system? So this is what's being aimed to. So if the ruling family is not represented there with those people who are having the capacity to negotiate and to get into compromises, this will fail, because if the strategy of polarizing the community continued to be implemented even within the dialogue, that is, or the process, the political process, to make it even worse than before, this is a game, but this game is disastrous, because you need 4 or 5 generations to recover from these polarization when they get into conflict and bloodshedding, etc., etc. And because of the wisdom, because of sincerity of all parts, all elements in Bahrain, we have not reached to the devastating situation as in other countries. So this is a leverage that could be used by the ruling family as well as the international community, that with this sort of people inside Bahrain, they are not, the tendency is, as I said, Valentine, not to troublesome, they are very tolerant, and they work with each other. So let's capitalize on this and try to negotiate this solution. So we want the ruling family to be there. We want a credible process of exchanging debates to reach a conclusion. We need confidence building measure. It is a fact that those imprisoned having lots of followers, and they have to have a say on this process. If we're talking about inclusive dialogue for everyone, the journalist and somebody in the corner, what about those having credible followers in the street and they are in prisons? If they are not engaged in a timely process to take over what is being debated and what is being agreed at later stage to their followers, this will fail. If we don't have the voice of the people at the end of the process, people will not legitimize the outcome. And when people do not legitimize the outcome, they will continue in the street. An example is Morocco, when the monarch issued that constitution and referendum. He managed to pull lots of people. I wouldn't say the youth were not staying in the street, but some sort of legitimacy and some sort of calm. If we don't have this, the voice of the people, through referendum or constituent assembly or whatever forms, if they are just wanting to ratify the outcome, the recommendation through the process of what they say, the current constitutional institutions, the parliament that is not representing except the government, this is not going to work. So we need to go into credible process, engaging the people, engaging the leaders who represent the people, so that we move into a solution.
Okay, thank you. Jalila, I wanted to follow up from your presentation. If you could, I mean, it was very helpful to see kind of some of the detail of all of the steps that have been taken sort of against the system of education, both educators and students, both in the university and level and below. If you could just describe a little bit more sort of the impact these actions persistently over the 2-year timeline that you were describing, in terms of the impact first on sort of the educational environment and how that's reflective, and what you see as the impact on the perceptions, the views of Bahrain citizens, and openness to some sort of compromise and solution to the political crisis.
What can I say about the education system, what happens to them? We know from the beginning that Minister of Education is taking a critical role in that, especially when he opened the door for the volunteers, which was at that time more than 6,000 volunteers were in the system just to replace the original teachers. If you want to imagine that these volunteers are unqualified and they don't have any qualifications to be inside the classroom to teach students. Instead, he is firing or dismissing the others who are highly qualified. This has a very bad result. If you go to the QAA site on BahrainQAA.com, you will find how is the achievement fall down because of these people. If the students' achievement fall down, that means we are having a bad future for our kids. No one is teaching them good. This is one thing. The other thing is teachers themselves they lost to feel safe in their environment, because there are a lot of spies inside the schools. They will just inform on them for anything they will say, or they will talk about it. There was the Minister of Education, they were hiring some of the police women, especially in the girls' school. They were inside the schools. They were registering everything. They were writing everything and writing reports, and they were submitting to the officials. I don't know exactly which officials, if they are Minister of Education or Minister of Interior, but if you live in that condition, what do you think the education environment is? So what I believe in, that we lost our education environment that we used to be proud of it in Bahrain. Bahrain was the first to have education in it. The most, which I say, the most important, the most powerful education system was in Bahrain. But within these 2 last years, it's not that anymore. And after all of that, we are seeing the Minister of Education is still there, and he is participating in the dialogue. Who can believe in that? Who can believe in this kind of dialogue if these persons are still there? And it's not just that. If we say that teachers, when I say teachers here, I mean especially Shia teachers, because they were the only teachers who were targeted during the whole period. Even though we have some colleagues from the Sunni parties, they were with us, but they were not subjected to any kind of punishment. Those teachers are forbidden from everything. They can't do anything in the system, in the life system, for on daily basis. For example, if they are going to, there was a late circular from Minister of Education asking about if any teacher is having a housing qard, a housing loan, for example. But the teachers did not know why they are asking this kind of things. And lately there was again a circular from Ministry of Education also to the students. If they are going to be absent tomorrow, that's the anniversary, they will be expelled, permanently expelled from schools. And today there were another circular for teachers threatening them also of being absent tomorrow. So if we believe that the education is the base or foundation for the community, this is ruined in Bahrain.
Thank you. And Tom, I want to react to a couple of things that you said. I mean, one thing I think was a very important point that you made was that the United States government needs to engage in Bahrain with the government and with the opposition at the same level. And I think that last part is often sort of omitted, and you'll very, very often hear from folks within the U.S. government, within the U.S. administration, but we do engage with all sides, and we do, not only in Bahrain, but we talk to the government and we talk to civil society and we talk to the opposition. But I think there's obviously, an enormous disparity, and in the sort of the status quo is to receive most of the information and really prioritize the relationship with the government. And the dialogue with the opposition is much more superficial. And I also think it's interesting that you often hear sort of frustration from U.S. government in other countries. You'll hear U.S. officials describe that the opposition is not well organized and not coherent, and it's very difficult. It's difficult for us to engage with the opposition because the opposition doesn't have its act together. And I think Bahrain is an example of one of the countries in the region that has, one of the most well-organized oppositions. There are credible opposition parties like Al-Wefaq that are respected and have sort of legitimacy and credibility in the street. And I think it would be very important to see the U.S. sort of elevate its engagement with the opposition to the same type of level that it has with the government, as you described. I wanted to get you to go a little further in talking about, you mentioned the approach of trying to save the security relationship, the very important security relationship the U.S. has with Bahrain, to save it by de-emphasizing it. I understand the logic there, but naturally that sort of approach would encounter a lot of resistance here in Washington and within the security and military establishment here in D.C. And we heard on the first panel, Ambassador LeBaron sort of talking, describe some of the sort of natural fears that exist that the Bahrainis, you'll often hear that, well, the Bahraini government would be happy to turn its security relationship to pivot toward Asia and elsewhere, and also that its relationship with Saudi Arabia, is sort of a trump of our efforts to change the relationship for the sake of our security relationship. If you could just kind of respond to some of these ways of thinking that are sometimes an impediment to the kind of changes that you were recommending.
Sure. Well, first, just let me stress what I think I did make clear in my presentation is that I do not want to see the United States leave Bahrain. I think it's a relationship that serves the interests of both sides. In my conversations with members of the opposition in Bahrain, I do not. There's no US Out of Bahrain movement. I think everybody agrees that it would be better in an ideal world for the relationship to continue. That said, when I hear this argument that, well, if we weren't there, they could easily turn to somebody else. I have to tell you, I've heard that argument in so many places. It is sort of a lazy and tired argument that assumes that most countries in the world don't value a relationship with the United States any more than they would with any other power. And the reality is that actually most countries would prefer to have a security relationship with the United States than they would with, say, China or with Saudi Arabia, because those relationships don't tend to be very equal. And in the case of Bahrain, I think having to depend entirely on Saudi Arabia, number one, if I were looking at a potential threat from Iran across the Persian Gulf, I'm not sure if I would want to rely entirely on Saudi Arabia, the brave Saudi Arabian armed forces, to protect my country, if I were pragmatic. And number two, I'm not sure if I would want to rely on just one country, and particularly one that might see my very small country as perhaps not fully independent and sovereign, but rather a potential province of a larger kingdom. So, I think Bahrain has this in common with most countries that the United States has a security relationship with, and that is that they want to preserve it even more than we do, even though if their diplomats are smart, as I'm sure they are, it is their duty to persuade us of just the opposite, right? It's their duty to persuade us that, well, we don't care, you guys can go off and we'll be just fine. So I start with the premise that Bahrain needs the United States there even more than the considerable extent to which the United States needs to be there. And I think that does give us a degree of leverage. And second, again, I just think there may come a point where we don't have a choice, right? It's not because, like, some human rights advocate says, tut, tut, you know, it is immoral to be aligned with the Bahraini regime. At a certain point, you know, if we'd had a base in Syria before the uprising in that country, we would not have a base there right now. No one in the Pentagon would be clinging to the base in Damascus in the midst of the violence and instability that has unfortunately befallen that country. If the political situation in Bahrain falls apart, which it has not done yet, the security relationship will not be sustainable. So it would be irresponsible not to plan for an alternative scenario, and irresponsible not to do everything in our power, even if we didn't care at all about the human rights situation in Bahrain, everything in our power to try to put the political pieces in the country back together so that the security relationship is sustainable for the long term.
Okay, thanks very much. At this point, we'll open up for questions from the audience. And if you please briefly introduce yourself and state your affiliation. And please feel free to direct your question to any member of the panel. We'll begin right here in the front with Hussein Abdullah. And I also wanted to just quickly thank Hussein, kind of echo Jalila's thanks, appreciation to Hussein and his organization, Americans for Democracy and Human Rights in Bahrain, for them helping to make this event possible. I bring Jalila here from Bahrain this week. So, Hussein?
I would like to thank the panel. I have two questions, one for Khalil, one for Jalila. Khalil, the Manama document, the opposition pushed for it for some time. The discussion around that document, I don't see it that energized or energetic anymore. Are you still pushing for that? Is that the minimum? Is that the maximum? Or you're willing to negotiate around the different tenets in it? The Saudi forces in Bahrain, or so-called the GCC forces, are they playing any positive role? Are you demanding their withdrawal? Or are they going to be part of the system from now going on? Jalila, you're a prime example of what has changed in Bahrain. I don't believe before February 14th you were activist, or you were protesting on the street, or even thinking to come here in the United States and speak at NED in front of all these people here, some of them policymakers, thinkers. What will take for you to go back to your normal life, or this is now your life from going on? And not only you, but women in Bahrain in general. Thank you.
Thanks. So we'll go in the back here. We'll take a few questions together.
Thank you very much. My name is Mohammed Abdullah. I'm the Director of Syria Justice and Accountability Center. My two questions are directed to Tom. I want to ask about the U.S. interest to stay in the Gulf area now, because the U.S. called one of their aircraft carriers recently, and doesn't look like they're interested that much so far to stay in the area. They're focusing more in China and other Asia area. And my second question is about the U.S. will be in a bad position if there's instability in Bahrain, if they have a naval base there. They will ally with the Bahraini government and turn a blind eye about the violations like they did now when the Saudis pushed their army to crush the people in Bahrain. Why the U.S. would be ashamed? Or they did lots of similar things with Ben Ali, with Mubarak before that, and with no shame. Thank you.
And just next, there.
Thank you. My name is Layla Magari. I am with the Women's Learning Partnership. I'm also the coordinator for the International Women's Democracy Network. My question is for Jalila. You spoke about the teachers union being targeted and educators being targeted specifically. I'm curious about the composition of the teachers union. Is it mostly comprised of women? And if so, is this why? Is this why you believe they're being targeted? And I'm also curious if there are other industry groups that are being targeted as well, if you could speak to that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. We'll give the panel an opportunity to answer these questions, and then we'll come back for further questions. Maybe, Jalila, if we could start there, if you could talk a little bit about in more detail the composition of the teachers union and the role of women and your thoughts on kind of who's being targeted and why.
Of course, teachers union in Bahrain composed of men and women. It's not just for women, but if you go to the system in Bahrain and see the percentage of women, female women to the male women, you find that they are more than 75%. they are women. And even in the union, our union, the most active members are the women. They are not men. So when they targeted the union, of course, a lot of women were targeted because of that. And mainly, when I was in the detention center, I witnessed more than 200 ladies who were sent to the detention center after torture. Most of them were from the education field. Most of them were teachers. And they were being tortured just for being members of the union, or if they were listening to us and joining the strike that we called on the beginning of the revolution. So I don't think that we were targeted just because we were women. It's because we were active on the ground as unionists. That's the main important point. And the government started to attack not just teachers, they attacked everyone in Bahrain. They attacked doctors, they attacked nurses, they attacked lawyers. But in our case, we were the biggest or the largest number because we make 1/3 of the manpower in Bahrain are teachers, are in the education field. So the numbers who were targeted were very large according to any other numbers.
Okay, if you could also address Hussein's question about, what would it take? He talked about how much the events of the last couple of years, the political events, have changed your life and the lives of many Bahraini citizens. Kind of, what would it take for you to kind of return to your old life, as a teacher first rather than an activist?
I would like to say that I am from the founders of the Bahrain Union, Teacher Union in Bahrain, and I am in that field for more than 12 years now. So, and I was known just for education. In the education field, I was not known in anywhere else. But what happens to me, of course, it turns my life upside down. I don't think that I can return back to my normal life. It's impossible. After 2 years now, I'm still having trouble sleeping at night because that my house was raided twice at dawn. So I can't sleep at that time. I can't return to normal. I don't think I can.
Khalil, if you could address a couple of the questions, maybe to begin with this, the Manama document, and sort of Tom also described some of the kind of broad outlines of what a compromise should include. The Manama document is one of the documents that had broad support in terms of kind of the requirements of what a solution could look like. Hussein was asking, is that still sort of standard for the opposition? Is it are there additional demands now? How have the demands changed? If you could comment on that, please.
I think we start with considering all the environment, that the geopolitics, the environment, the demography in Bahrain, and the regional context. And the vision come out as constitution and monarchy, with 5 pillars to this political system: elected government, fully authorized elected legislative authority, an inclusive security, independent judicial, based on one person, one vote, an electoral system that is fair and justice. This is the minimum requirement, we believe, that to progressive even system. We know that when we ratify the constitution, this is not the end of the life. This is not the aspiration of the Bahraini people. The implementation towards going to that system is going to be difficult and lots of challenges. North Ireland, when they have Good Friday, it took them maybe 10 years to implement the Good Friday agreement. So having a constitution is a great step. Having a constitution with those aspirations for democracy is a great step, but the greatest step that we need to move into is the implementation, the real implementation, because there will be different games being played by maybe different parties to bypass what's been agreed. So this is moving forward is something very important. Are we rigid in those demands? These demands are these are principles. Elected government could be directly by electing the prime minister, or could be through the largest bloc, or could be a coalition of blocs, or could be some sort of things. What do we mean by fully authorized legislative authority? It's the meaning is that the end product of any legislation lies with the sovereignty of the people through their representation. So the voice of the people is always there in the government, in the legislative authority, and independent people in the judicial authority, so that they provide justice. And we cannot continue with a security system that fully based on sectarian nature and expert. So we have to move into an integral, plural security system. So this is the way forward. But are we rigid in not negotiating with confidence-building measures? I've said I'll extend those confidence-building measures or governance within the political system, not just to the rulers, but within the context of GCC, as to how to make them comfortable without jeopardizing the rights of the people to be the system, not the rulers. The other question, GCC coming to Bahrain was a mistake. It's not compliant with the agreement for defense within GCC. We swiftly urged the GCC leaders to pull those troops. They will not continue because they have a bad presence of repressing the people or contributing to repress the people. So their continuation is not going to be helpful to the people of Bahrain. I'm just referring to Tom's comments about if we want to secure Bahrain, do we depend on Saudi Arabia or any of the GCC, or depend on we have the Fifth Fleet Navy, so if we need protection, we have now the Fifth Fleet, and we have new agreements with the British, just recently signed. So we have different defense agreements that is not supposed not to be part of the repression to the people, unless we discover that. Thank you.
Thanks. And Tom, if you'd like to comment on, there's this question about why would the U.S. be ashamed, if things were to deteriorate further in Bahrain as they weren't with Ben Ali or Mubarak, and it's kind of standard practice. And if you could talk a little bit further about your scenario you were describing, in which if things were to get worse in Bahrain.
Yeah. I think the first part of the question was about the pivot to Asia too, and I think long term it is important for authorities in countries like Bahrain and throughout the Gulf to notice that the U.S. is thinking more and more about its future in Asia and a bit less about its future in the Gulf. It's probably would be good to notice that in some time the United States is likely to be the world's leading producer and exporter of oil and natural gas. This does have an impact in the long term, but I wouldn't exaggerate it. I don't think the United States is leaving the Persian Gulf now or in the immediate future. What I was stressing is that if push comes to shove, which we hope it doesn't, the United States could take care of its security interests in the Persian Gulf without a physical presence on Bahrain. It would be better not to have to face that, but it is entirely possible. The headquarters of the Fifth Fleet was on a ship until, I think, 1995, 1996, and the United States was taking good care of its interests in the Persian Gulf under those circumstances. Would the U.S. be I think it would be. I wouldn't be as cynical as to say that the United States has never cared about this stuff and it's not going to care now. I think one can debate how fully and how quickly the Obama administration dropped U.S. support for Mubarak during the Egyptian revolution. What's not debatable is that from the standpoint of the rulers of the Gulf regimes, it looked like the United States dumped Mubarak, and that they were quite worried about this. That from their point of view, it looked like a major shift in the way the United States was dealing with its allies in the Middle East. I do think a lot has changed since the Arab Spring in terms of the thinking of U.S. policymakers and the sense of what pressures they are under from the Congress, from civil society in the United States and in the region, and their sense of what long-term U.S. interests are. So I do think there is a level of violence and repression and instability in Bahrain that would not be sustainable for any U.S. administration. The question is, and I think most officials in the Obama administration would agree with that. The question is, do they also think somehow that they can muddle through this, that Bahrain can sort of continue to simmer at a low boil for a very long time, or perhaps even return to a period of stability and repression at the same time, as it, a period that it experienced many times in the past. And I think for reasons that Jalila just eloquently expressed, I don't think it's going back. I don't think people are going back. They're going to go forward one way or another, and it's in our interest that they go forward in a way that involves compromise.
Thanks. Before I turn back to the audience for additional questions, I want to sort of make a quick note. This event is being covered live both on Twitter, and we have a live video cast, and it's available to be watched live via the internet. But we've also learned that during the conference today, the URL on the website where it's being broadcast live in Bahrain has been blocked. And so earlier it was possible for those people in Bahrain to watch this event live. That seems to no longer be the case, although as far as we know, it's still possible for those in Bahrain to follow this discussion via Twitter. As far as we know, that's not currently blocked.
I guess that's a compliment, right? We started to get too interesting.
We'll go back for a round of questions from the audience. We could start in the back on this side, please.
Hi, Jim Loeb from Interpress Service. I just wanted to ask, it seems to me that senior U.S. officials, including, I think, Secretary Clinton, have talked more and more about Iran's influence or negative influence in Bahrain, or allegedly interference. And I wanted to know if there was any basis to this that you knew of, and what the impact of this kind of rhetoric from Washington was on the situation there.
Thanks. In the middle here on this side.
Greg Aftandilian with Center for National Policy. My question is for Khalil on the security services. You touched on this a little bit, but I'd like you to flesh it out a bit. What would you, as an opposition leader, would like to see in terms of changes to the security services? Is that the leadership on top, getting rid of foreign nationals, making it more representative, or human rights standards? What exactly are you demanding as an opposition party? Thank you.
And directly behind you.
My name is Dick Rosen. I'm with the Council for a Community of Democracies. I'd like to ask a question about what civil society groups such as the one I represent might do to help get the right people to the table to negotiate the kind of settlement that Mr. Malinowski has outlined. For example, the Council of Community of Democracies has appealed to the governments, to its secretariat, to offer an invitation to the Moroccan monarchy to participate in a dialogue with other monarchies which have taken the constitutional route, such as Bhutan, Nepal, and so forth, that are trying to make that transition, and established monarchies that are constitutional monarchies in Western Europe and in Japan. And the question is, would it be practical and useful to involve Bahrain in this same kind of dialogue?
And so just in front of you here. Yes.
Yes. My name is Maliha Shihab. I have two questions for Khalil Al-Marzooq. The first question is, since 2010, there have been uprising and a revolution in many countries in Middle East. And I could say most of them, or all of them, have achieved their goal, except Bahrain. Don't you think, I know there are many reasons for this failure, but don't you think that there is reason, lies in the Bahraini opposition itself? The Bahraini opposition has a very clear strategic plan, but not a tactical plan. Secondly, I noticed that the member of Bahraini opposition, most of them are human rights activists, not politicians. Don't think that may participate in kind of in the failure of not the revolution in Bahrain to be succeed. The second question is I forgot. Just give me a second.
Okay, I think we will take.
Yeah, I have another question.
We'll go to the person behind you. We'll take one last question, then we'll give each panelist
John Duke Anthony,
last
National
response.
Council on U.S. Arab Relations. My question is for any of the three speakers in terms of what Khalil rightly recommended about the necessity of having the people engaged or involved in any compromise, mediation, solution, or settlement. Given that, if you had elections now, there seems to be a sentiment that the best organized, the most militant, the most focused and disciplined would likely win. And this would be among the Sunnis, possibly the Salafist, or an echo version of the Muslim Brothers. And on the Shia side, Al-Haq, which is more extreme than Al-Wefaq, which you represent. Sir, would any of the three of you address that, and what would be the implications for the consequences of such outcomes?
Okay, thanks. Khalil, maybe we'll start with you this time. You have a lot of questions, so you could try to address
I think quickly, Iran involvement, I think even Bassiouni was saying that there is no evidence that Iran is involved in Bahrain. But let me go extreme. I don't like to be extreme, but let me go extreme. Either we are idiots and waiting for Iranians to come and tell us that there is democracy and there is something called elected government, etc., and wait for them to tell us, go to the street, or we are really well-educated people. Since 1920, we've been calling for participation. In 1920, 1930, 1945, 1955, etc., before the Iranian revolution's been there. And we reached into contractual constitution in 1973 with, between quotes, the help of the British pulling from the region, how to secure those elite sheikhdoms. They were very threatened. They are threatened from Saudi to take Bahrain. They are threatened from the Iranians to take Bahrain, and they are threatened from the Bahraini people. And the only conclusion is that we will give you democracy and this contractual constitution that we will continue ruling you. 18 months, they just bluff us and just dissolve the parliament, etc. So this is Iran's reality in the region, but this is an excuse. And the only way to close these exploitation is to have the satisfaction to the people of Bahrain so that Iran won't even have space if they want to exploit the situation. Security services, I think there are success stories in South Africa, success story in North Island. North Island, Protestant were dominating the police. Then they have only 3% for Catholic. Then the situation changed after the Good Friday. They have established a civilian board to oversight the police. They have changed the police from police force to police services. They have created independent ombudsman on the police and integration. The most important thing is that the police represent the people, not represent the ruling family and one sect of the community. So those success stories could be learned, and some sort of deployment could happen in Bahrain. We will look into an integrated police forces, including the army, that should be integrated from the Sunnis and the Shia and the minorities, any of the Bahrainis. It should be on protection to Bahrain, protection to the laws, rather than protection to the ruling family. So the faith, the leadership, and the oversight of the security forces should lie with the parliament, so that misconduct should be questioned in the parliament or into the judicial process. And I think we need to have some sort of change in the US policy and the military and security aids and relationship, that we will not accept that you're bringing to us only one element, candidates for training, for etc., etc. So with these promotion, I think we will get there in few years. Definitely it's not going to be 1 year. It's going to be between 5 to 10 years to move into an integrated police force or police forces. Why the Bahraini uprising is not successful? Because the Tunisian is not yet achieving their goals. Just last few weeks, they debating and now a debate in there. It's too complicated. It's different in Bahrain. We don't have an independent armed force. Would they stand isolated? And they said, no, we will not kill our people. We have an armed force ready to kill and ready to kill more if they are allowed to do so. So this is one thing. We have the regional context. We have so many things. It's too complicated in Bahrain. And the key issues that we did not have from the international community is this unequivocal denouncing to the human rights violation and urging the government to stop it. In early February 2011, we had tough statement to the government of Bahrain from President Obama, William Hague, Hillary Clinton, and others, and Ban Ki-moon. They stood in very good stand to stop the repression and pull the army from the streets. This all evaporated. Hillary Clinton said when the GCC troops came to Bahrain, it's a mistake to engage the GCC troops. 24 hours changed that. It's the right of the Bahraini government to use the GCC troops. Why is that? Because they need the GCC funding to strike Libya. So this is the situation. It moves from the values and principles into the interest, the strategic interest of the United States and Western countries. I will conclude into this. So what is missing is that there is no clear position from the international community to the freedom of expression and assembly in Bahrain. There is no clear position of protecting the human rights, like Nabil Rajab, Abdul Hadi Al-Khwaja, and the political prisoners and others, which continually been in prison. There is silence. Few statements coming here and there. This is not enough. This is not what's been practiced in other places of the world. That's why we can't, with a small nation of around 600,000 people only, we cannot be in the street always and be crushed and to maintain this. Luckily, still we are maintaining to some level, and we'll continue this. I hope I've answered all the questions.
Yeah, I think, Jalila, I don't know if you have comments on, there was this question about we've talked a lot about, there's been a lot of discussion of what the United States government can and should be doing and how policy could be more constructive in Bahrain. There's a question about what civil society organizations, international organizations can do to help and support. And so I was wondering if you have thoughts on what it is that you and your colleagues in Bahrain would like to see from international actors that want to be supportive of your struggle, and then any other closing thoughts that you have.
What we like to see from the international activists, I think here in your democratic countries, you have the right to put any kind of pressure on your governments so that they can change their policy against us, against the foreign policy. So we would like to see that all the societies who can do this, they can put pressure on, I don't know how the policy here in America is done, but I think they can do something like that, putting pressure or changing the policy towards Bahrain, helping and maybe statements, maybe raising their voice in our side. That's what can we do, and this would be appreciated, highly appreciated, if they can do this for us.
Okay, thank you. And Tom, give you the last word here, and if you also address specifically, there was this discussion of would it be constructive to help have include the Bahraini monarchy in discussions with other monarchies that have undertaken reforms, and to what degree might that be helpful?
Well, it's obviously important for the monarchy to feel secure that a process of compromise is not going to lead to the end of everything that it has grown accustomed to. And I think reasonable voices on both sides of the divide recognize that they're not calling for a republic. They are calling for a system of government in which the monarchy will continue to play a very important role, more than just a symbolic role, as I read it. And it is important to persuade the ruling family that that is indeed the case, that the dialogue is not a trap that leads to its ultimate demise. I don't know if that's the best mechanism for doing it, but that is important. And again, just think about. I sort of keep coming back to what are the alternatives here. There was a reference to Iran in one question. There was a reference to, what happens if you hold elections? Do the radicals on both sides win? What's undeniable is that the longer compromise is delayed, the more we strengthen hardliners and rejectionist forces on both sides, and the greater the opportunity for Iran to come in and meddle becomes. And so you have this paradox that the longer you delay reform, the greater the chance of these nightmare scenarios, but then these nightmare scenarios are used as an excuse because we fear them so much to avoid reform. And the only way out of that vicious cycle, in my view, is to accelerate reform so that you don't get to a point where the things that we all fear inevitably happen.
Okay, thanks very much, and thanks very much to all of you for coming. We're out of time. I think this has been an excellent conference, but two really valuable panels and excellent remarks this morning from Congressman McGovern. And we'll continue to follow these issues closely in Bahrain and in the Gulf as a whole. We look forward to seeing you all at our next event.